Hey guys, I haven't done any reading today because I started learning how to do some basic embroidery, and as you can see, I haven't done very much, but I was working quite late today. So, look, this is all I've done so far. But hopefully, by the end of this beginner's course, I'll be able to do some squishmallows and some Pokemon for you because I really want to do that to, keep you happy. But tonight, we're going to read some Mirabelle, Chapter 4. Chapter 4. I kept waking up. Sorry, actually, let me just turn the music off because I think I'm missing some music or something. Okay. I kept waking. So I kept walking until I got to a dark and gloomy part of the forest. Then I stopped. I was all alone. It was perfect. I knelt down on the ground and took the necklaces off, admiring again the swirling and glittering potion ingredients inside the tiny bottles. I didn't have a cauldron, of course, so I took off my shoe and put it in front of me. There she is. Then, before I could change my mind, I poured the little bottle of purple seeds into it, followed by the swirling mist of dragon breath, and stirred them together with a twig. The mixture immediately began to crackle, and little stars and moons flashed into the air. "Oh," I whispered, and I leaned closer so that a few petals from my wonky flower crown fell off and drifted downwards. I had no idea what would happen. The mixture began to fizz and hiss. Pink and purple smoke puffed out into the air in glittering clouds, spluttering and crackling as the petals fell into it. I wondered if I should say some magic words, but I didn't know what, as I didn't have my spell book with me. So instead, I stared down at the mixture, wondering what it would do. Suddenly, the twig in my hands started to twitch, and I let go of it in surprise. It landed fully in the potion and began to wriggle. I gazed at it in wonder and then noticed that something else was starting to happen. The flower petals that had fallen into the potion were wiggling about too, rising up and joining together in a rosy clump. The clump began to float around my head, forming itself into a loose dragon-like shape. Excitedly, I pulled the flower crown off my head and began to pick off more petals, throwing them into my shoe. As soon as they touched the potion, they began to squiggle and writhe, floating up to join the others, so that the flower petal dragon got bigger and bigger. It began to skip and dance around the clearing, flapping its wings. I looked around me to see what else I could put into the potion. Leaves. There were leaves all around. I jumped up and began to pick them off the trees, throwing big handfuls of them at my shoe. Any that touched the potion seemed to come to life, joining up with the other leaves and flowers. Soon there were 5 large dragons. So there were 5 large dragons made from leaves, flowers, and twigs. Rustling and rippling round the private little clearing, I gazed at them proudly, and then began to skip with them, dance round and round, a whirl of perfume petals and summer-smelling twigs. I danced until I was out of breath, and then threw myself back down on the ground, delighted. I felt as though all the witchy naughtiness had been danced out of me. I was ready to go back to the fairy party now and be good for the rest of the night. I was sure that the dragons would go off into the forest and no one would ever know about them. They would probably disappear eventually once the spell wore off. I reached out for my shoe and noticed that it still had quite a lot of potion in it. That was odd considering how many things I had put into it, but magic is a funny thing. I turned my shoe upside down, trying to shake the potion out of it, but it wouldn't budge. I peered in and gasped. Something else was happening now. The mixture had hardened up while we had been dancing. it had shaped itself into a ball that was starting to grow little arms and legs, a long, spiky tail, wings, claws. I held my breath as sparks flew and fizzled in the air. The magic finished, and something wiggled and snorted in the bottom of my shoe. A tiny purple baby dragon. It was much, much smaller and much more solid than the other dragons, as it wasn't made up of wispy leaves and flowers. It had real scales that shimmered in the starlight. It stared up at me with its big eyes, then flapped its wings. Oh my god, oh, the baby dragon's right here. It's like a small ball, rising shakily into the air. When it snorted its tiny purple nose, little sparks and clouds of glitter puffed out. "Hello, little dragon," I whispered and held out my hand. The dragon landed on my palm and began to poke around my fingers. It tickled, and I laughed. "You're so sweet," I said. "You need a name." I thought for a moment, admiring its glittering lilac scales, the same color as some of the petals that had fallen into the potion. "Violet," I said. "I think it suits you." There's Violet. The little dragon puffed out a rose-colored cloud of glitter, as though she approved, and then flapped off my hand and began to flutter around my body, poking her nose into my long hair before disappearing into the hood of my flowy fairy cape. I smiled, liking the feel of my new little pet snuggled up against my back, and hoped that she wouldn't disappear. Some magic doesn't last, and I still had no idea what sort of potion I had made. Happily, I began to make my way up back through the trees towards the big clearing in the forest where the fairy celebration was happening. As I walked, I wondered what had happened to the other dragons. They had disappeared while I had been distracted by Violet. I expected they had made their way deep into the forest, maybe even becoming one with nature once again. I could see the flickering flames of the big fire through the trees and hear the noise of the fairy celebration. There, she's going back. It sounded louder than before. There was even the sound of screaming. Maybe I was missing out on something exciting. I walked faster, coming out through the last of the trees. Then I stopped. "Oh, my stars," I gasped. Above the big flickering fire in the middle of the fairy celebration were my 5 large dragons circling in the air. 5 large dragons made from leaves and flowers and twigs. Their bodies and wings rippled and swirled with dark spaces for their eyes and mouths, which gaped open eerily in the flickering light of the flames. They looked terrifying, lit up by the firelight, completely different from the funny, strange dragons that they had seemed to be when I first created them. Fairies were running, flying, and screaming in all directions. "Oh no," I whispered, and I put my hand in my pocket to feel for Violet. That was an exciting chapter. I hope you guys liked it. Love you.